My name is Jen Kelly. I am the marketing lead for Backstage, and I will be hosting us today, as co-hosted as always by the amazing Himanshu. So if you have any questions, feel free to drop them in chat. We have a a slightly lighter agenda today, in part because we are pulling apart our sessions between adopter-focused content today on our traditional Wednesday, and then we have added a second session immediately to follow on Thursdays at the same time. It is more contributor-focused, diving deeper on technical topics, etc. Okay. Cool. So with that, I think we will get started. First and foremost, I just wanted to call out that we have some really exciting posts up on Backstage.Spotify.com around metrics, which I know is a very hot topic for adopters. How are you measuring proof of concept, proof of value, and success across those things? We'll be sure to drop those links into the chat. We wrote a post from the Spotify perspective in the ways in which we measure Backstage success, and Expedia, the Expedia group was gracious enough to provide a perspective on how they're setting up their proof of value metrics. So we'll be sure to share those around, and they will also be included in the newsletter next week. And then from there, I would love to move on to maintainer updates, and I'm going to turn it over to Ben to cover Scaffolder Beta v3.
Yep. Hey, I hope you all can hear me okay. Thank you, Jen. So we've been working on unifying the templating language that we use across Backstage, especially in the software template. So if we go back a few months, we used to have 3 different templating languages. I think we had handlebars for the entity definitions. We then had cookie cutter inside the actual scaffolding engine, if you like. And then we also added nunchucks as well to kind of remove the dependency on Python and cookie cutter. So we've had kind of gone a little bit step further than that now. We've tried to simplify or make it more unified, I guess, for the template entity definitions themselves. So they now use nunchucks as a templating engine. So it kind of gives a little bit more standardization. You kind of get what you expect in the entity definitions. We've made a lot of other changes as well in terms of new features, kind of made it easier to write templates as a whole. So we pushed that out maybe last week's release, I think. It's not default or anything like that. Like, we just want people to test it. So I'll post a link in the chat after this, which basically shows a migration guide, how to do it. And it'd be good if some people can test it just to see if it works fine before we actually consider moving off beta 2 and into beta 3. So I'll stick the link in after this, but if people can go check it out and give us some feedback, that would be awesome. Yeah, that's my quick beta update. Awesome.
Thank you, Ben. Cool. So moving on down the list, we have a plugin of Spotlight of the month now that we're going to be kind of framing up. And so I'm going to just move on to introducing, and I really practiced Yusei Haulela from the Roadie team to provide an update on the Prometheus Spotlight, or the Prometheus plugin recently contributed by his team.
Thanks, Jen. It was a little butchered, but it was good enough.
I tried.
So we've kind of taken a look at what are the issues, what are the main features that are missing from Backstage on the open source repo side. And one of the things that was like most voted item was Prometheus plugin to start displaying stuff from there. And we kind of took a crack at it and figured out what would be the cases that users want to see on Backstage when they think about Prometheus and their services. So 2 things came to mind. One of them is alerts, and the other one is then actually creating graphs from Prometheus and displaying the data that Prometheus has gathered and being able to display those. This plugin is a little bit more complex to configure. So if we take a look at the annotations that the Prometheus itself has, you can see that there are 2 different things. One of them is rule, and the other one is alert. The alert is fairly straightforward, so we are just displaying the alerts that users have configured in their Prometheus instances. And the rule is then essentially everything else. So what we are doing is we are pulling the data from Prometheus, either based on rules that you have configured on Prometheus. It could be individual metrics that you want to graph from Prometheus, or it could even be like straight up Prometheus queries that you have you want to graph. As you can see, these are 3 different things in here that are comma separated. And that is because if we take a look at the Prometheus content page itself, we are actually able to see 3 different graphs and all the data for them as well. Kind of in the similar way that Prometheus itself shows these graphs in there. Another thing to note when you start actually adding this to your application is this little pipe operator in here. So if we take a look at the node memory active bytes metrics, which is something that Prometheus natively exports, I think, we have a pipe and instance in here. That means that, okay, we have, 5 graphs on this one. And if we hover over, we can see that instance is one of the fields of the graph itself, one of the definitions of this one. And that instance is then used as a grouping to display the correct data only for this individual graph. All of this is documented here on Roadie GitHub, as well as npmjs.org, where you can find this plugin. There are other options. If you don't want to use the annotations, you can create your own queries directly because we are exporting the components from them as well. And if you want to do complex queries that use pipes or commas, then you can create Prometheus rules in your Prometheus instance and refer those directly, which then would be displayed as the graph in there. Yeah, that's pretty much it for this plugin. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, we are flying through the agenda, but we're going to kind of move on to a section where we're going to talk product adoption, open discussion, following updates and maintainer updates and demos within the community. So I'm going to kind of open up the across the issue and make sure I can actually share my screen. Looks like I still cannot, and I've got to figure that across the using permission. Himanshu, if you want to pull that up, that would be great. Thank you. But I know that the first topic that was raised that we wanted to talk about was some product adoption strategies or best practices that we can share from Spotify, and that we want to open up into discussion for us to talk through in greater detail. Challenges conducting product adoption. This came from B. Zamorano, who would love to learn more about challenges conducting product adoption for Backstage within organizations. And I think that ideally would be groups who are also outside of that. But I want to turn it over to Lee or Austin, if you're here, to kind of share a bit more on some of the things we took into consideration when it came to rolling out Backstage and making it sticky for developers here.
Sure, I can start. I think for us, like, rolling out Backstage is kind of an interesting thing because Backstage kind of has had many different faces, names, and really served many different purposes over the years itself. Candidly, it even precedes the years before I joined Spotify. So it's been around for quite some time. I think one of the things that we have learned internally is, and I've probably said this to many of you before if we've met, is we very much treat Backstage and candidly most of our internal products that we build from a platform perspective as if they're external. So we measure them as if they're a product that we're selling or what have you to an external company. We market them. We have developer advocates. We focus on design, just So candidly, our bar for distributing an internal product is just the same as if we were contributing an external product, with the one benefit being our customer, if you will, our closest adopter is quite nearby, which is both good and bad. That means that we can, of course, cut some corners, which is good and bad. But it also means that we can get really, really solid feedback. And it means we can enable them to be contributors. And that kind of goes into my second point. So the first is treat your internal product as if it's an external product. The second is really, I think, try and build a community and interaction model around the product or around your Backstage implementation, both from an inner source perspective. So enabling others to contribute and build plugins, of course, that's sort of in the fundamental ethos of Backstage, but also community sessions like this. These are something we've done within Spotify for a long time. Honestly, we've gotten away from them a little bit since we've been focused so much on supporting you all in the open source community, but are starting to do them again internally too. So having hack days or hackathons just focused on Backstage, or community sessions just focused on Backstage, and bringing the internal community together, giving out stickers and swag and all kinds of things. I think it's a really, really important element of garnering both excitement and also traction for the product. That, again, to my first point, you are measuring as if it's an external product. So yeah, the two big points that come to mind for me on this one are treat internal products or treat Backstage as if it's an external product in terms of your fidelity measurement, investment, that kind of thing. And then the second is where you can try to build community, conversation, and excitement through whatever means you have at your disposal. I don't know, Lee, anything you want to add?
No, I think you pretty much nailed it. I mean, the other thing that floats around my mind is pretty much the same thing that we tell when we meet with any of the community when we've been talking about adoption, and that being, focusing on a problem, or like one problem at a time, if you will, that you're trying to solve. Backstage can do a whole host of things. So making sure that you're investing time in in one specific area that you're going to have impact, you'll instantly gain confidence in the product. You'll instantly start to gain trust in the product, and then build on it from there with the, going on to the next, and then the community things. So I think you nailed it, Austin, mostly.
I'd love to open it up if there's anyone else who wants to chime in from another organization in terms of things that they run into around this topic. We have officially entered open Q&A. Okay, cool. I think that then we want to move on to sort of our second pre-can topic that I know we as a group had slated to discuss, which was tech writers' point of view, which I know, and I think Gary's going to chime in here on TechDocs for Markdowns and GitHub. So would love to hear experiences from technical writers rather than engineers using Backstage TechDocs functionality, in particular about them working in Markdown and GitHub.
Right. Good. Very good. Yeah, I've got a bunch of stories that I can share, and maybe there are some others here that could might want to say some things as well. But so I'm a product manager nowadays in one of the Backstage teams, and we cover technical documentation, so TechDocs, and discoverability as well, so Backstage search and things like that. And but before that, I was a technical writer for 20 to 30 years or so. So and that's like a long time. And it's a bit ironic because one of my first jobs as a tech writer working for IBM, we used a product called Bookmaster, and that was like a tagging language for writing your documentation. So you didn't have to bother about kind of graphics or like formatting or anything like that. You just wrote in this tagging language, a bit like Markdown. and I really liked it at the time, actually. And then like many years later, after going through all sorts of things, I'm not sure if there's any tech writers here, but going through all sorts of things with like Madcat Flare and Microsoft Word and lots of other things, coming back to kind of Markdown. So I personally like it, and it's fine for me. And I did have hiccups in the beginning working with GitHub and stuff, but I carefully documented the process that I needed to go through, and I just stick to that process religiously. So it's like 10 steps, like make a branch, So I've got my 10 steps and I just follow that and it works every time. But if anything weird, if I deviate from that, or if like something unexpected happens, then I need the help of an engineer often. So that's just my experience. But of course, what else can I tell you? I just tell you one funny story. I might go on for ages with this. No, I'll try to just tell this one funny story. It's worth it. It's quite quick. At Spotify, we had a tech writer who had kind of virtually single-handedly created all of our Golden Path tutorials. I'm not sure if you know about our Golden Path tutorials, but each of them is about 90 to 100 pages. There was about 5 or 6 of them, and they were all in Google Docs. And this tech writer was going on sabbatical, and he said to me, and we were talking at the time about like that the documentation should be in Markdown and we should move in that direction, docs like code. And he said, the Golden Path tutorials will never be in Markdown, over my dead body. And then he went on sabbatical, and then things moved really quickly at Spotify. And it just so happened that this team got created to kind of productify documentation and docs like code and tech docs and blah, blah, blah. And by the time he came back from his sabbatical, all of his Golden Path tutorials were in Markdown. And I was actually scared of him coming back, because I remembered that he said over my dead body. So I thought he was going to kill me or something. And I was actually, it took me ages to actually tell him that we'd done it. That was just a funny story. Final thing, another of our so we do have tech writers at Spotify, and they cover other stuff. They kind of swarm on particular topics that need to be done across Spotify, and we admit we have optimized for engineers. So this whole thing with docs like code and Markdown and tech docs, we have optimized for engineers, and we've openly said that, and we have to just say it sometimes, like, yeah, we optimize for engineers, sorry. And some of those tech writers that we have at Spotify weren't into this in the beginning at all. And one particularly liked working in Confluence, because there was loads of things that he could do, and he felt that there were lots of benefits and stuff. And but slowly we kind of moved him over to Markdown, and now he's our kind of favorite customer. He really likes kind of working in that way. So I'm not sure I'll answer the question, but there's like 3 fun stories. I think that there are definitely tech writers that don't want to write in Markdown, that they want more functionality, they want more features. And then there's a bunch that think it's fine, that they're more on the tech side and kind of, I think this is the way to go and this is good. So there's some stories and an opinion. I'm happy to get like more follow-up questions or clarifications.
We have a question in chat on if there are any Spotify Golden Path tutorials available to the public.
They're very specific for our kind of setup. So they probably wouldn't. The specifics wouldn't be probably that useful. But maybe we can discuss that or talk about that. I can imagine open sourcing some templates, for example, or something like that. But I don't think that's the case. There's a blog post, of course. I'll find it later and post it here, describing our journey with the Golden Path tutorials. So I'll post that later. But I don't think there's any actual Golden Path tutorials that are public. But I'll think about that.
I can maybe suggest that we are looking at doing Golden Path for plugins and
yes.
for Backstage.
Exactly.
So there will be some form of Golden Path for that.
That was exactly right. Yes.
Awesome. Okay, so I was wrong. We are not moving fully into the Q&A section because we have another demo that we wanted to throw to the Frontside team. And Taras, I again apologize if I'm butchering your name, but we want to talk about simulation tooling that the Frontside team has built for Backstage.
Awesome, thank you. Oh, you got my name perfectly, so it's nice to hear. Thank you very much. So should I go on? Am I good to go?
Yes, I made you co, so I think you should be good to share your screen.
Okay, awesome. Okay, so what I want to talk to you about, everyone, today is something that we created to help ourselves, but I think it can help others as well. So this is specifically tooling that we created to allow us to use simulation while doing Backstage development. So just a little bit about Frontside. We are a developer experience consulting company. Backstage has become a really big part of our business. Our background is work doing shift left testing, so making it allowing companies to transition from doing QA testing to having developers write their tests. And we create a lot of tools in the process. So this is one of the tools that that we created to help ourselves doing Backstage development. Because one of the challenges with Backstage is that as a developer using Backstage to create a developer portal is that local development can be really tricky because Backstage is an aggregator. It by nature connects to lots of services. And we have one of our clients that has 30 different services that it needs to connect to. So getting all of those services, working locally or being able to connect to all of them, especially in this particular case where we have a VPN that we don't have access to. So we really, if we didn't have this tooling, we would not be able to do any kind of work because we don't have access to all of this data. And one of the other issues that comes up with, especially working with big companies that are adopting Backstage is that personal identifying information is a really big issue. And there are processes that require that data is anonymized, and getting that data to become anonymized, especially when you have lots of different data sources, and making all of that experience easy is very problematic. And then when you think about adding automated integration testing into all of this, in a situation where you want to test the Backstage portal, you want to make sure that your processors are working correctly, but your processors require connecting to VPN that you can't use in development. It becomes really, really, really complicated to a point where you could almost say that it can actually be, if you experience all these things at the same time, it can always be impossible. And so what we had to do is find a way to make it possible to use Backstage and use external services, but without accessing VPN, and then have this tooling available for us locally, and then make it available for us while running integration tests, automated integration tests. So what I'll show you today is the tooling that, so just to give you kind of a bit of an idea of what this looks like, what I'll show you today is going to be using Backstage that connects to, in our case, we're using Auth0 as authentication provider. And these are just the three services that our version of Backstage is using. But there's actually going to be like 28 others that we're going to be connecting to. So in this particular case, what I'll show you is connecting to LDAP. We also have GitHub simulator, but I'm not going to show you that today because it requires quite a bit of setup to make it more portable. And so this is the setup. We have Backstage that uses Auth0 authentication, and we're using the Backstage LDAP processor and GitHub processor. So the way that this works is that we create a simulation, and a simulation has each of the services running inside of the simulation, and that simulation is using a single graph that backs all the data. So all the data is consistent across all the simulations, and each of the simulators is it's exposing the API that the that the original service exposes. So Backstage integration uses the same mechanisms to connect to these services as the original, as it does to talk to real services. So with Auth0, it talks through HTTP. With LDAP, it talks through TCP, and with GitHub, it talks through GraphQL over HTTP. So one of the challenges that you have to deal with in working with this is that one of the biggest challenges, especially when you're working with a lot of data that comes from many different services, is that maintaining mocks is extremely difficult. And we know this with smaller unit testing, but when you think about maintaining mock data for a simulation that spans multiple services, it becomes extremely complicated because real data has lots of relationships. Because if you think about, for example, if you think about LDAP and Auth0 or any kind of authentication, your LDAP might represent the user information, but your Auth0 needs to use that user information, or your authentication system needs to use that user information. So if you have a user in your authentication system, it has to be the same user that's stored in LDAP and has to be the same user stored in GitHub. If the IDs or email addresses or any of those things don't line up, you're going to get it's just not going to work. It's not going to give you meaningful data. And when you're accessing these systems, the data behind these services is not going to be consistent and reliable. So this is where the underlying graph comes in. So we have a data graph that represents the data that all these simulators use, and we can for each simulation we can run these data graphs in parallel. And one of the things that we've learned over the years about building these kind of systems is that maintaining this graph data can be really difficult, or maintaining the mock data can be really difficult because those relationships, there's lots of different systems for doing this, but one of the kind of typical things that you see in this kind of simulated data scenarios is that those relationships are manually managed, and it becomes really difficult to create a simulation from a data perspective that matches the reality. And so what we created with the way that we designed the graph, I mean, this is we're talking about 5 years of R&D and experience and actually putting this stuff in production that we were able to put together here. But what we're using here is probability distributions to create the actual data graph. So you don't have to manually manage how the relationship, like how the data is created. What you do, you declare what the probability of that data existing. Like, so I'll give you an example of this. So if you think about, like, in the case of our particular, one of the clients that we're working with, is they have a huge data set. There are like tens of thousands of users in LDAP, and about 20% of those users have a GitHub accounts in GitHub Enterprise. So when we create a simulation, what we want to do is we want to create a simulation that has that distribution, where we have, if we have 10,000 users, out of those 10,000 users, 20% of those users should have GitHub accounts, and those GitHub accounts should have the kind of typical distribution where you've got a few, they have like 1 or 2 or 3% of people who, a kind of small percentage of people who have access to many organizations, so they're members of many organizations. Majority of people are only member of one organization, because they're working on that one team and they're just contributing to that one team's projects. But there are some people that have like 3 or 4 organizations. So this kind of in the way that our data graph is configured is that you describe what the distribution is supposed to be, and then it will automatically construct the graph according to that distribution. So I'm going to show a demo now. Are there any? Actually, no. We'll hopefully have a few minutes for questions afterwards. So what I'll do here is, so let me show you first show you what this looks like. So we have a, I'm not sure if I'm sharing am I sharing my whole screen? Can you see my VS Code?
I can just see the slides.
Okay, so let me switch over, stop sharing. Desktop, okay. Okay, so configuration of this is really straightforward, because so if you look at here, so we have the Auth0 configuration, and that's pointing to localhost 4000. So instead of accessing an external authentication system, we're connecting to a service that's running locally. And for LDAP, the same thing. Instead of connecting to LDAP provider and LDAP server that is running in the cloud, we are connecting to a local LDAP. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start everything now, so you can see what that looks like from a development perspective. You run yarn start, and what it's doing is it's starting all the simulators behind the scenes. And I'll show you what the result is going to be once this. Okay, so starting. Okay, so there's going to be, we're of course are doing screen share, so it's running slowly. So what I'll show you here is the simulation. We have a GraphQL API that we can use to see the state of the simulation. And this is important because we need to, so we'll just do subscribe here, we'll get state. So we'll get all of the state right now in the simulator. So right now we only have three LDAP users configured, and then there's admin user that's used for authentication. And so what you're seeing here is this data is automatically generated. And so we need this username and password to log into Auth0. So that's why I need this interface. You can also see which simulations are running. So in this case, we have Auth0 and LDAP. And so we're starting our, so what we're running, so the LDAP, our Backstage started, and it's running in the background, and it's now running the LDAP processor, and it's pulling the data from LDAP. And so now when we finish reloading a Backstage instance, we're going to sign in. So this is going to, so now this is Auth0 running on localhost 4000. So we'll take the username, the email address, and we'll take the password. We'll sign in here. So now it's authenticated. So Backstage now authenticated. And so if we go into users here, we can see we should be able to see the users. Of course. Let's see. Oh, I know what's going on here. All the users. Here we go. So these are the three users that we have that we pulled in from LDAP using the LDAP processor. So this is not like the LDAP processor has not been modified, nothing special. It's actually, we have all the code in the in our front. We have this project configured. I'll share the link later, but I want to show you something like when it comes to configuring LDAP data. Let me show you what that looks like. So let's say I wanted to add. So here, this is the description. So there's a couple of things that are interesting here. One is that the data graph is stable, meaning that whenever we generate the data, we're always generating the same data. So the data is not shifting under your feet, like you're not getting different data every time. This data is stable. So you can rely on it for automated testing, because if you're generating users, it will always generate the same users. So I'm going to change this to 100 users. So let me rerun this. So what we'll see is now that, so we have now, if we look in the, let's look here. We'll look here, we should have, so we now have 100 users. I would expect the first three to be similar to, it should be the same as the ones we saw earlier. And so when this thing starts, so now what it's doing is actually ingesting all the 100 users that we have in a database, or that we have in our simulation. So it's processing all of them. And once this starts, we'll have 100 users in that database. It's in our in our Backstage. So the same thing. So this is the demo that I wanted to give. So if there are questions, now is a good time to ask them, because from here it's just the same thing as we talked about earlier.
Thank you so much, and I just want to reiterate how much we appreciate Frontside's contribution in the community and how active you all are leaning in. Such that I also want to just give a quick plug for the Roadie and Frontside Backstage Unconference, first ever Backstage Unconference, happening, I believe, on November 4th. Which is, I have a little update around that week as well to share at the end in terms of housekeeping. Okay, so I'm going to pivot us back to.
Jen, can I just one quick thing? So I just wanted to share that our plan, what we'd like to do is make this tooling available for others to use. And so what we'd like to be, our ultimate goal is to get all of this to essentially, you should be able to start a Backstage instance using processors that are built into Backstage and run them all against simulation. And then we'll be able to have a good testing story, and we'll be able to do development without using personal identifying information. So if you're interested in this, let us know, and we're happy to talk about this. There's a lot more to do here, but I think it looks promising. So let us know if you're interested in talking about this. So that's it. Sorry, Jen.
No, thank you. Thanks. All right, great. So I'm going to keep running down the question list, although there is a very robust discussion happening in chat around some adoption journeys and that teams are sharing out. So I appreciate that. And we can definitely move that into the limelight. But I want to make sure we get through some of the pre-canned questions as well. So our next question, and I might ask if Mark Avery is on to ask it directly, is about best practices around incorporating AWS resources, API Gateway, EC2, RDS, S3, CloudFront, et cetera, as well as where to put generalized docs around incorporating these CloudFront links, CDK constructs, parameters to set, maybe templates for these. So Mark, if you're on and wanted to clarify anything around that question, otherwise we can talk AWS.
Yeah. Basically, we have some, best practices around some of these resources that we want to kind of bubble up. And then also just like tracking, something like an API gateway, for example. Like, you don't want to have to put like the exact API gateways in there. So you want to have some kind of like generalized, notion of an API gateway, and then be able to like use APIs. We were thinking about using AWS, I forget like what their config or something like that. Or I forget what their tool is that you can kind of go and grab some of their generalized stats are. But yeah, I was just wondering if you guys have any of that kind of stuff around resources.
I'm looking for folks to chime in on any generalized resources.
Yeah, and if no one really has any idea, they're not using Backstage in a way, that's cool. And if we come up with a solution, I can kind of try to put something together and let you guys know how we completed that.
I'm gathering by the crickets that, at least from the standpoint of this call, I don't know that exists, but we do want it. Everybody, I think a lot of folks, we've gotten a lot of questions in chat around some of these about standardizing across some AWS resources. So we need to, I think that's a need for sure.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Cool. Thanks for raising that. Oh, here we go. So Brian from Roadie says, we're configuring some of our stack using CDK. We've considered creating templates for this stuff. So we would be interested in how this stuff could get done. Cool.
Yeah. This is Brian. Yeah, like our kind of services outside of Backstage themselves, like a lot of it's written in like Lambdas, and we're deploying that with CDK. So if you come up with any solutions around this stuff, it's something that we'd be interested in looking at. And if we find any solutions in the area, we'll definitely send them your way.
Okay, cool. Yeah, we were originally thinking about maybe using the templates and kind of almost having them generate like not sometimes generating artifacts, but then maybe sometimes generating kind of like documentation and like best practices. So it's like, oh, I put in some different choices and then that kind of generates this document on like, oh, here's your CDK constructs that you would use or add to your application. And then here's some, and then I don't know if out of the box you can add documentation to templates, but then we were thinking that would be a good kind of touch point. So that's like, I want to add, an RDS instance to this existing repo. I can go here and kind of like maybe use the templates to kind of generate some of that stuff. We were thinking maybe trying to try that out, but maybe write something more custom. We aren't completely sure yet.
Yeah, we've been using a tool called Serverless Stack. I don't know if you've come across that, to kind of wrap the CDK stuff. So what we were initially going to do, because we're currently trying to integrate with this scaffolder, so what we were initially going to do was write a template that could bring up a whole, serverless stack basically. So, create the whole project structure and push it to GitHub and then set up all the GitHub actions that will actually deploy it to prod. In order to demonstrate that what we're doing with the scaffolder will work. But it sounds like it might be a little bit different to what you were planning.
Yeah, we're planning on doing that too, but then there's like some points where we want to kind of let people, like they already have an existing project and they just need some extra things to kind of add in. We're going to be looking to like integrate templates for we have like our own kind of internal builder and see if we could integrate some of that stuff that just kind of auto generates it. They're talking about moving to this like NX narwhal type thing to use some of that stuff. So I don't know if in the future maybe we'll integrate with that. I don't know if anyone's heard of that, but yeah. And then we still have that notion of wanting to be able to like, I want to go to this service and see like all the S3 buckets that are associated with it or something like that. And so we haven't we're thinking about maybe using some of the entity refs as like tags in AWS and then using being able to pull against those tags and then kind of create a graph with those with some links, but we haven't kind of fleshed out what the best pattern for that is yet.
Tim, do you want to just reiterate what you threw into the chat on opening up a PR to an existing repo instead of creating a new repo that might be good for this use case?
Yeah, sure. There's a scaffolder action to publish a pull request instead of publishing a whole new repository. So that's pretty good for like adding a chunk of functionality to an existing repo. The other thing we do at Spotify is some of our templates include infrastructure definitions. So things like, here's the Kubernetes deployment I want to have, or you can think like Terraform config files or something that gets merged on CI/CD builds and actually deployed out. So you can include some of those things as part of your templates as well.
Okay, cool. That's good to know. Thank you.
Okay, I think we have one more question in the issue that we want to make sure we cover from Julio Zinger, excuse me. I would just killing it on the names today. I would really like to hear what the plans are with regards to observability. The Prometheus metrics included in the catalog have been very useful for us internally, and I wonder what the plans are to productionize them and possibly allow adopters to define their own metrics within the Prometheus server. For example, instrument backend plugins to expose metrics as well.
Hello. Okay. We're heard all right. So we want to use OpenTelemetry. That's kind of where we're going. There are some missing kind of metrics constructs. I think the metrics part of OpenTelemetry isn't built out quite far enough yet. There's not a stable node library, if I remember correctly as well. So we're kind of waiting for OpenTelemetry to get those pieces a bit more stable so that we can rely on them directly instead of inventing anything ourselves. We added in Prometheus in the catalog because we felt we really wanted and needed some more information about how the catalog operates. Maybe do a bit more of that in other places if needed, but that will go away eventually once we can get open telemetry there.
Okay, cool. There were actually a couple more questions added, adopter focused, that I want to make sure we get. I know we're running up against time, but this is a long one. Hold on, let me pull it up and make sure I can. 1 second.
I'm sorry, I can summarize it as well.
Yes, please do, Andrew.
I mean, I think it's similar to some of the things that were asked in the chat, which is basically just, we're right at the start of our adoption journey, and we're trying to figure out what's the best way for us to spend our time to what plugins should we implement, what features should we try and get working to deliver value and try and drive adoption. And I just wondered if there's been any sort of strategy shared between adopters that have already sort of been successful and have kind of rolled out amongst the companies, and because I guess I feel like we're trying to ask questions internally that I'm sure other companies have already answered. What's the best adoption strategy kind of thing. So I guess my specific question is maybe, is there any shared resource for adoption strategy? Has anyone started trying to sort of share tips about how to actually drive adoption and how to get started with it?
Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think we have some getting started from users in our Backstage Spotify.com. That website has some blog posts from people adopting Backstage, so some case studies. There is also a talk from me and Patrick that we did on KubeCon that we had to pre-record, but it should be hopefully on YouTube soon, where we talk about some of the getting started adopting Backstage in your organization. That's more geared towards the catalog, but it could still be useful for you guys. Guess that's going to come out in some newsletter once that talk is out.
Yeah, that'll be in the monthly newsletter that follows next week. So that KubeCon talk should be available for everyone to take a look at. I think, though, point is well taken that while we at Spotify have definitely provided some thoughts and given some overview materials on getting started. I don't know, and folks can correct me if I'm wrong, that there's something that feels a little bit more crowdsourced and is coming from. We're starting to get to the point now where we are building out case studies, where we're starting to share more around those adoption journeys and some of the strategies that we put together. For instance, the measuring and metrics content that we've published this week on the .com blog. However, I think it's something for us to think about and come back to, Andrew, as well, on wherein we can kind of crowdsource that further and start to maybe have others put pen to paper on adoption strategies that have worked or learnings that have come along the way or best practices. But some of the resources that folks linked out in chat are places to start.
If I can add something to what is already said, Andrew, if you want to book a slot to have a deeper conversation, maybe sharing, so in a sort of one-to-one, I don't know if you are aware, but there is a button in the website where you can book a slot with one of us or the team, and we can share maybe some precise answer to precise questions, share what we are aware. There is also this option if you want to get some direct feedback in this sense.
Okay, thank you. I wasn't aware of that. I'll go doing that. Yeah, and thanks for sharing the links. Some of those are useful. I guess is trying to figure out where to actually invest our engineering effort into what should we actually build out? Should we build all the core features first, or should we try and find a specific problem that we know our organization has that we're going to say we're solving with the dev portal? That's what I'm struggling with a bit.
Probably the second, but then again, if you want to know more, we can discuss. You can book a slot and we can discuss. But again, this is exactly the kind of places where we can share experience. So it would be good to hear also from others. But yeah, no problem. You have more than one option.
Yeah, start small.
Mm-hmm. Narrow use cases to prove value has been our advice across the board, and how we built Backstage as well. It was definitely incremental.
Just to add to that we do take a lot of new adopter
calls that we just referenced there, multiple per week. And Jen and I were actually just talking this week that there's a wealth of information in our meeting notes from that we're going to go through and aggregate over the next coming weeks, and hopefully be able to put out in some form of content that will, hopefully be able to answer some of the questions that are more commonly coming up.
Okay, I think that concludes Q&A, unless there's anything else that somebody wants to raise in our final minutes. And I'll pause and just scan chat, make sure we haven't missed anything.
Is Bernard here? Before Andrew, there was a question from Bernard, but maybe we can cover that in. Maybe that's not a question. I think
it seems like it's we're excited about Backstage statement, and as are we.
Feel free to unmute yourself and say that out loud because that's also useful.
Okay, cool. So just last items, as I think I've said this like 5 times now, but contributor session tomorrow, and we will be diving into some of the topics listed on the issue. It will be at the same time. And then I just want to call out that Spotify is hosting a wellness week for all its employees, November 1st through 5th. And I think people are taking it pretty seriously. I've seen a lot of notes about code freezes, but the whole of the maintainer team might be a little bit slower that week. And we will, if there's anything urgent that comes up, we're going to figure out kind of what our coverage game plan looks like, but we will be pretty much out and resting and taking care of ourselves. And I think that's concludes the end of session housekeeping. And thank you all so much for joining. We appreciate your participation as always. And have a great rest of your morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you're joining from. Thank you.